Welcome to the facts behind the U.S. economy, what's really happening and how it affects your wallet. Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover the key data that shows how the economy is performing today. Spoiler alert, it's not all doom and gloom, but there are some sharp contrasts between what the numbers say and what you might be feeling. So buckle up, because we're diving into the truth behind the stats. Let's start with the most common measure of the economy, gross domestic product, GDP. This represents the total value of all the goods and services produced in a year. In 2023, the U.S. GDP hit a staggering $27 trillion. Sounds impressive, right? But GDP can be a bit misleading. It's like looking at the score of a basketball game without knowing how each player contributed. To understand how the economy really feels, we need to look beyond just the big numbers. One of the most important things to consider is real GDP, which adjusts for inflation, so we get a clearer picture of actual growth. For example, before the pandemic, real GDP grew at about 2.5% in 2019. But then the world flipped upside down in 2020, and we saw the economy shrink by 2.2%. Recovery came fast, with a whopping 5.8% growth in 2021, but things cooled back down to 2.5% in 2023. And here's where it gets personal. GDP per person, a key measure of individual prosperity, reached an all-time high of $81,624 in 2023. So, if the economy's growing, why does it still feel like prices are through the roof? That's where inflation comes in. We all know the feeling, going to the grocery store and wondering why the same cart of items costs more than last month. Inflation is essentially how much prices rise over time. Before the pandemic, inflation was cruising along at around 1.5% to 2.3%. But by June 2022, it had skyrocketed to 9%, a number we hadn't seen in decades. Fortunately, by May 2024, inflation had cooled down to about 3.3%. But let's be real here. Just because the rate of inflation is slowing, that doesn't mean the impact has vanished. Prices have risen 19% since the pandemic started, meaning that everyday essentials, groceries, gas, housing, are now way more expensive than they were a few years ago. Take gas, for instance. In 2019, the average price per gallon was $2.60. By 2022, it had nearly doubled to $5 a gallon in some places. That's not a small bump, and in 2023, even though prices dropped to $3.52 a gallon, they're still much higher than what we were used to pre-pandemic. Housing, too, has taken a hit. Since 2021, rent and home ownership costs have shot up by 21%. Over a longer stretch, from 2010 to 2022, home prices soared 74%, while wages only increased 54%. It's no wonder many people feel like they're falling behind. Buying a home today is a far bigger financial stretch than it was a decade ago, especially when mortgage rates are hovering around 7%, the highest in 20 years. Now let's talk about wages. At first glance, wages seem to be on the rise. The median wage in the U.S. jumped by over $8,000 from 2019 to 2023, hitting $48,060. That sounds great, right? Well, hold on. When you factor in inflation, that increase shrinks dramatically. Adjusted for inflation, real wage growth has only been 2% over those 4 years. So while your paycheck might look bigger, it's not going as far as it used to. But what about jobs? Before COVID, unemployment was at a historically low 3.5% in February 2020. Then the pandemic hit, and unemployment shot up to a shocking 14.8% just 2 months later. Fast forward to 2023, and unemployment dropped to 3.4%, even lower than pre-pandemic levels. By May 2024, it inched back up to 4%, but still, that's pretty solid given the roller coaster we've been through. Let's dig a little deeper into income. It's not just about what you earn at your job. You also need to consider taxes and government benefits. For the middle 20% of American families, the average market income in 2022 was about $64,117. After taxes and government benefits like Social Security and Medicare, they ended up with around $68,575, virtually unchanged from the past few years, once inflation is factored in. For the bottom 20%, it's a different story. Their average income from work was just $2,800, but they received about $33,000 in government assistance. After taxes, they ended up with $31,500 to live on. Meanwhile, the top 1% made over $2.9 million on average, paid about $1.3 million in taxes, and still took home $1.6 million. The disparity is clear. Government benefits make a huge difference for those at the lower end of the income scale. Another factor impacting the economy is demographics. More people are living alone today than ever before, with 29% of households consisting of individuals without children, up from just 13% in 1960. Plus, a larger share of the population is now over 65, with retirees relying heavily on Social Security and Medicare to make ends meet. Let's talk about poverty. In 2022, 11.5% of Americans, that's nearly 38 million people, were living in poverty. For a family of four, the poverty threshold in 2023 was $3,900. Even more concerning, 15% of all children are living in poverty today. It's not all bad news, though. More Americans now have access to retirement benefits, paid sick leave, and family leave than they did a decade ago. In fact, 54% of families had a retirement account in 2022, compared to just 37% in 1989. Paid family leave is also up, from 11% in 2010 to 27% in 2023. So what does this all mean for you? Here's the bottom line. GDP per person hit a record high of $81,624 in 2023, but rising prices are eating away at your wallet. Unemployment is down to 4%, but inflation has pushed the cost of living up 19% since the pandemic. Housing prices have outpaced wage growth, and many families are relying more heavily on government assistance to get by. The job market is rebounding, with 6 million jobs added since the pandemic started, but real wage growth has been sluggish, increasing only 2% after adjusting for inflation. The U.S. economy is a complex machine, with highs and lows that don't always affect everyone equally. But one thing is clear. While the numbers may say one thing, the experience on the ground often feels very different. The U.S. economy is resilient, but how it impacts your everyday life depends on a mix of factors: jobs, wages, inflation, and of course, where you fall on the income scale. Thanks for sticking around. If you found this insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more data-driven takes. And if you're curious about another fascinating aspect of modern life, check out our video on Inside the Secret World of Google Street View.